Hello everybody, my name's Dave, thanks for joining me. Should I fit an oil catch can and ongoing EGR issues? The simple answer to this is maybe. But why maybe? When you know the reasons why we need a catch can, then maybe the answer becomes obvious. And then when you know why, the answer becomes a resounding maybe. So how do I know whether maybe is a yes or a no? Let's start with explaining what a catch can is used for and the issue that makes a catch can necessary. The issues here are caused by the mechanism in most engines called an EGR. The function of a catch can is straightforward. It removes oil from the EGR recirculated air before sending that air on and back to the intake system. So what is an EGR and its history? Exhaust gas recirculation. It has roots in the 1940s when the first engine experiments to investigate the NOx reductions, that's nitrogen oxide, potential of EGR were carried out. However, it wasn't until the late 1950s that EGR was seriously considered as a NOx control measure for diesel engines. The 1970s and the 1980s. By the 1970s, EGR was being applied to heavy-duty diesel engines in North America. The technology continued to evolve with the introduction of cooled EGR in the early 2000s. This marked a significant shift towards a widespread adoption of EGR in heavy-duty diesel engines. The 1990s and the 2000s. In the 1990s and the 2000s, EGR began to be applied to spark ignition engines, basically petrol engines, primarily for fuel economy purposes. Mazda's turbocharged Skyactiv gasoline direct injection engine, introduced in 2012, uses recirculated and cooled exhaust gases to reduce combustion chamber temperatures, allowing for higher boost level enriching air-fuel mixture. In the modern era, today EGR is a widely used technology in both diesel and gasoline engines, with all applications ranging from light-duty engines to heavy-duty commercial vehicles. Modern EGR systems are designed to recirculate a portion of exhaust gas back into the engine cylinders, reducing peak in-cylinder temperatures and NOx emissions. However, not all engines suffer from EGR issues, and here is why. Now there's a note here. The original reason for EGR was to reduce NOx gases from entering the atmosphere. This reduces engine operating temperatures and reduces knocking. What concerns me about the 4JX1 engine is that the combustion engine have pistons, and they create compression using piston rings to seal the combustion gases above the piston and create compression. However, if the piston rings are installed incorrectly, or they're worn, or they're damaged, combustion gases can get past the piston rings and create a thing called blow-by. Now, blow-by is when combustion gases get past the piston and pressurise the crankcase underneath the piston of an engine. Left unchecked, it would pressurise to the point where the crank would leak. Whether that be a failure of engine metal casing or seals, what we don't want is any pressure in the engine. So obviously seals are easier to repair, but we realistically don't want either. We use crankcase ventilation to relieve pressure, which is connected directly to the EGR system in the fact that we do not just vent the pressure to atmosphere and send it back to the intake. In the olden days, when we didn't really care much, and before EGR was legislated, we used to vent those oily gases to atmosphere. However, due to such legislation, engine manufacturers have to contain that oily air. Why they never just fitted factory catch cans is beyond me. It is a contentious point. They utilised the previously invented EGR system instead. And in theory, this is better. However, depending on what type of injection you have, depends on whether this wonderful EGR system damages your engine or not. Yes, whoever came up with EGRs in the 1940s wasn't thinking about other ongoing issues, likely because there were mainly indirect injected diesels or carburetted petrol engines. Even though the first ever direct injection engine was built in 1916, the first mass-produced direct injection engine wasn't produced until 1997 by Mitsubishi. A conspiracy theory perhaps. This may not be the case, but if you think about it, car manufacturers are being handed money on a plate. This in reality indicates why the engine manufacturers don't want to fix this problem. Direct injection engines, which many manufacturers use today, have to comply with emission legislations. In doing so, an EGR is fitted. The EGR is known to cause long-term problems, so regardless of whether you buy new and keep the car long-term or second-hand and inherit the issue, the EGR will eventually cause issues. For most people, what that means is having the engine cleaned and likely some spare parts, all of which are not cheap to have done. This generates a lot of income from the auto industry, so why would the manufacturers do anything else? I guess that catch cans do not raise this same amount of revenue and likely prevent components such as sensors from being damaged. Which would also mean that the spare parts revenue is not being raised either. For example, the catch can is just a can catching oil. It doesn't go wrong, rarely goes wrong. So they're not going to generate any spare parts where an EGR system may. So what are the issues with EGR? Over the years, diesels used injection and cars used carburetors. Therefore, petrol engines used the same principle where the fuel and air were mixed into the intake chamber and then fed into the cylinder as fuel-air mixture. During the advent of injection, petrol engines injected the fuel into the intake as it travelled past into the cylinder. The injectors got closer and closer to the valves until the realm of directed injection came along. Mixing the air and fuel directly in the cylinder was far more efficient, so it was widely adopted. However, depending on the type of injection system you have depends on whether there's an issue or not. I have both types of engines, so I use both my vehicles as examples. There's another note here: it makes little difference whether you have diesel or petrol in this instance, although diesel engines do produce more carbon deposits due to the fuel used. The 4JX1 engine is an example of a direct injection engine. This means that injectors inject directly into the piston chamber. The LS3 in my Commodore is an indirect injection engine, which means that the injectors inject into the intake manifold. So what's the difference? In a direct injection 4JX1 engine, when the oil-filled air is returned to the intake of the engine by the EGR, it deposits some of the oil on all of the surfaces, which mixes with carbon deposits to form a mass of carbon in the intake and on the valves. Because only air and oily deposits pass this point, the carbon buildup will need to be cleaned, and if left unchecked will eventually block the intake, starving the engine of air. In an indirect injection engine, the same thing happens, but because the petrol vapours are injected before the valves, the petrol vapours keep the intake valves clean and the problem of oily carbon deposits does not occur. So, do I need a catch can? Well, if your EGR is standard and you're running a 4JX1, then the answer is yes, you do. If you've removed the EGR in a process called the EGR delete, then likely the answer is no, you don't. Personally, I would fit a catch can to any direct injection engine. Legality. Is it illegal to bypass an EGR in Australia? It appears that bypassing an EGR system in Australia may not be illegal, but it is crucial to consider the specific circumstances and regulations. Emission standards and regulations. Australia has strict emission standards and regulations to reduce air pollution. The Australian Government's Department of Environment and Energy sets the standards for vehicles' emissions, and manufacturers must comply with these regulations. Manufacturers is the key word there. EGR system purpose. Get out of my face, cat. The EGR system is designed to reduce NOx emissions by reburning exhaust gases. Manufacturers install EGR systems to meet emission standards and reduce the environmental impact of their vehicles. Bypassing EGR, consequences and risks. This is where I've highlighted the text and said scare tactics. Bypassing an EGR system can lead to increased NOx emissions, which can harm the environment and human health. Additionally, bypassing EGR may void the vehicle's warranty and potentially lead to the engine damage or performance issues. When I was a kid, no cars had EGRs and we never got affected by it, as far as I'm aware anyway. Legal considerations, and this is more scare tactics. While there are no specific law prohibiting EGR bypass in Australia, manufacturers may have their own policies and warranties that prohibit the restrict EGR bypass. Yeah, right. Additionally, local authorities may take action against individuals or businesses that intentionally bypass EGRs, potentially leading to fines or other penalties. Well, my local council can't even manage to empty bins properly or manage barking dogs, so they're hardly going to get onto EGR systems, are they? In summary, while bypassing an EGR system in Australia may not be illegal, it is crucial to consider the specific circumstances, regulations and potential consequences. Manufacturers and authorities may have their own policies and regulations regarding EGR. Individuals should exercise caution when modifying their vehicles to avoid potential legal and environmental issues. Scaremongering, but sensible. This is Mia, by the way. This is Phil and Caroline's cat, my son and his wife. So my conclusion, I have a catch can fitted already. I will leave it in place. It won't do any harm. I won't be removing the EGR system because this article taken directly from the Isuzu manual in section 6E97 page 1214 and 6E112 page 1229. My theory is, why fix what is not broken? I can catch nasties in my catch can. Unless someone can convince me otherwise, I won't be deleting the EGR. And they'd have to convince me. I don't mean everyone else has done it, so why is it wrong? I mean, convince me. I'm not going to read through the Isuzu bits. I'll see you on the next video.